Hey guys, welcome back to SUP'S Garage. On this video, I'm going to be showing you how to remove your forks on your 2009 GSXR 1000, and this should work for most GSXR models and years. So let's get started. Alright, so I'm going to start off by working on the right side by removing the caliper first, which is going to be held down by two bolts, one on top and the one on bottom. Alright, and once you remove those two bolts, just simply remove the caliper by pulling back and sliding it out from the rim. And then we can just leave this hanging for now. And since we're already working on the right side, we're gonna go ahead and remove these three bolts. Alright, so once you remove all three of those bolts, the right side should be loose, as you can see here. But we still gotta get the brake line that's being held down by this clamp here. And all we gotta do to get this out is we gotta push forward until it slides out just like that. You usually have this clip here that's between both calipers that's usually clipped down here in the back of the fender. And to remove that, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is squeeze this clip, pull back, and it should come right out. All right, now moving on to the left side, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna be removing the caliper first, which only has two bolts just like the other side. And again, just pull back and slide it out from the rim. And leave that aside as well for now. Now we can remove the three bolts just like we did on the other side. Now I'm not gonna be removing this piece just yet because I find it a lot easier to remove this once the wheel's off. But the next part we're gonna be focusing on to start removing the wheel is gonna be right here on the right side. We're gonna start off by loosening these two bolts. Now we don't have to take them off completely, we just gotta get them loosened up in order to be able to loosen the axle bolt here. Now that I got these two bolts loosened up, now I can go ahead and loosen this big bolt here. All right, at this point, you're gonna have to lift up the front wheel. I'm using a jack that's directly underneath the headers, so it's not gonna damage anything. Because obviously when removing the forks, you're gonna have to leave the bike lifted up somehow. All right, so once you have the wheel lifted off from the ground, I'm gonna be using a mallet and this big screwdriver to be able to tap out the axle. Now, if you're gonna be using something like this, just be careful not to hit the threads because you don't wanna damage them. But what you could also do is use a socket that fits in here to be able to tap that axle out. And you only need to tap it out just enough to be able to grab it by your hand and be able to pull it out from there. You're just gonna use your other hand to lift up on the wheel just slightly, therefore it could be a lot easier to be able to pull this axle out. All right, now at this point, all we gotta do is pull the wheel out. Go ahead and hold this piece at the same time, therefore it doesn't just drop on you. You're just gonna slowly pull the wheel out and the wheel comes out. Now at this point, this piece should be pretty easy to get out. All right, next we're gonna be focusing in the inside on the bottom triple tree. There's gonna be two bolts clamping down the forks on each side. Now, it doesn't really matter what side you work on first, but in my case, I'm gonna be working on the right side first and then moving on to the left. And just keep in mind, we're not removing bolts completely when it comes to the triple trees. We're only loosening them enough to be able to slide these forks out. I'm gonna start off on the bottom one first. Once you loosen it enough, should be able to turn it by hand to make it a lot easier. All right, now I'm gonna be working on the top one. And again, once I got it loosened enough, I'm just gonna be turning it with my fingers to make it a lot easier. All right, moving on to the other side, we're gonna do the exact same way. And sometimes you're gonna find it easier to move the steering a certain way to be able to get better access to those bolts. All right, got it loosened enough, gonna use my fingers again. All right, now moving on to the top one. All right, got loose enough. Now I'm gonna use my fingers again. And as you can see there, they're both pretty loosened at this point. And just be careful when loosening this one because you don't want to hit your tank. And also be sure that the Allen key is fully in because you don't want to strip those bolts. Loosen it up just enough where you can turn it by hand. And that should be it for that one. All right, now we're moving on to the last bolt that's holding down the forks at this point for the right side, which is gonna be the one on the top triple tree. Keep in mind, once you start removing the last one, you do wanna be holding the fork with one of your hands because otherwise, more than likely, this fork is just gonna fall straight down. All right, again, just make sure that Allen key is fully in there. We're gonna start turning. And just like all the other bolts, we're just gonna loosen it just enough to get that fork out. And the easiest way at this point to get this fork out is just twist back and forth. And as you can see, it'll slowly come down. And you don't have to move the handle anywhere, just leave it here until we put the forks back on the bike. All right, now moving on to the other fork, same steps. We're gonna be loosening the handle first, and then the last bolt in the top triple tree. All right, and here's the last bolt. I'm gonna loosen it a little bit first. I'm gonna have one hand holding the fork and the other hand loosening the bolt. Same thing, we're just gonna twist left and right to get that fork out. All right guys, and now it's time to show you how to reinstall the forks, and I'm gonna start off on the left side. All right, so we're gonna be going in through the bottom, going through the handle. And the other thing you do want to make sure, depending on where yours was clamped at, to be sure you clamp the distance on both sides of the forks the same. And just to give you a better view of what I mean by the distance, is this gap here is from the bottom of the fork cap and the side of the fork. So I just got to make sure it's the exact same way on the other side. Therefore the front forks are even. Now I do want to say, before tightening any of the bolts that clamp down the forks, on these type of forks, just make sure that the words are facing you, because you don't want to tighten this up and it's going to be facing upside down or to the side or anything like that. So just do your best to straighten this up as much as possible, and then you can start tightening down those bolts. I'm going to start off by tightening this bolt first. All right, got that one done. All right, so the next part we're gonna be focusing on is tightening down the handle back on. You can see there's a tab here. Well, that tab actually sits in a certain spot on the top triple tree, and it's pretty easy to find out where it goes. All right, we're gonna raise this up, and sometimes it can get stuck a little bit, so wiggle it up, and it should go up. And as you can see here, the way you'll know that this handlebars is on correctly is even if you try to push to the right or left, it's not gonna move by much. And also it's gonna be pretty obvious that the handlebar is sitting where it should be. But I like to retighten the handlebars all the way out, so pretty much all the way to the left. Once you got it all the way to the left, just tighten that bolt back up and we'll be done tightening down the handlebar. All right, next we're gonna be tightening the two bottom bolts on the bottom triple tree. But you saw earlier how I loosened those. Pretty much the same thing, but in reverse order. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten those back up real quick. So one of the things I forgot to mention when tightening the bottom triple tree bolts, I like to start off by tightening the bottom one first all the way. Once I've done that, then I move on to the top. But then I'm gonna come back to the bottom, tighten it a little bit more, and do the same for the top. A lot of times when I move on to the next bolt to tighten next, what it does sometimes is tighten this clamp a little tighter on one side than the other, so it'll loosen the other bolt just a little bit. So that's why I like to double tighten these, just to make sure that both of them are evenly tight. All right, now I'm just gonna do the exact same thing on the other side of the fork. You gotta make sure all those wires down there have to be in front of the fork, not behind the fork. Now there are some bikes that I've seen that some wires are behind the fork. Just keep an eye out when you're taking yours apart. Just be sure where the wires go before you remove the forks. Therefore you do it the right way when you're putting it back on. All right, so I'm gonna start off the exact same way by putting the fork in the bottom triple tree first. Then going up, moving on to the handle. And again, just make sure those wires are in front of the fork before you go all the way in. Once you've done that, now just go all the way to the top triple tree. Now this is the part you gotta make sure that you're even with the other side. Now I'm gonna start off by tightening the top triple tree, just like we did on the other side. And now we're gonna do the handle. Remember to keep an eye on that tab. You wanna make sure that tab is on correctly on the top triple tree. I'm gonna slide this up. And just like I did the other side, once it's in there, you could move it just a little bit left or right. On this side, I'm gonna move it all the way to the right, which is towards the front of the bike, and then tighten my bolt. All right, and then just finish tightening it up. And the handlebar is good to go. And just like the other side, just tighten these bottom triple tree bolts. Therefore the fork is fully clamped on at that point. All right, so the next thing we'll be putting on is the front fender that goes on top of the front wheel. Now I do want to say, if your forks look like this once you've tightened them down completely, don't worry, all you got to do is tilt it the way you need it to be and you're good to go. Now the easiest way I find to put this back on is I'm gonna tilt sideways for the fork can go in here, and then I can slide it this way and turn it up. I'll show you what that looks like. I'm gonna put it in sideways, go into the fork. Once I'm inside the left side fork, then I'm just gonna twist it, and there you go. It's already in there. Now for now, I'm just gonna let it sit in there, because I wanna make sure I get the wheel in first, and then I can start bolting down this front piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and start putting in the front wheel. I'm just gonna hold up this plastic here, therefore it doesn't get in the way. Now, I do want to say before putting on the wheel, just make sure your spacers are in there. As you can see, I got mine already in here. And now on this bike specifically, it doesn't have one on the left side because it uses the axle as a spacer. So just make sure you don't have one on both sides. And also, you do want to make sure that your wheel is being put on correctly. In my case, this one's ready to go. All right, so now I'm gonna start off by putting back the axle on the wheel. And you do wanna make sure that when you put this back, you grease this up if it's not already. Now you can't really tell, but I already re-greased it, and it doesn't need that much, because if you put too much thick of a coating on it, once you slide it in there, it's gonna remove all the grease anyway. All right, next I'm gonna hold up the wheel while I'm sliding in the axle. Therefore it goes all the way across, like so. You're gonna go ahead and tap it all the way in with the mallet, but before you do that, you're gonna wanna make sure that the axle's actually in the other side of the fork before you start tapping it in. Because more than likely, the wheel's just gonna tilt and it's just gonna be pushing against this fork at that point. Go ahead and tap on the axle lightly. All the way through, as you can see here, we're good. And at that point, you should see that this side, the axle is completely flush. So we're gonna go ahead and tighten these 210 bolts now. Now, when tightening these bolts back up, they don't have to be too tight, because you definitely don't want them to strip or snap. All right, moving back to the other side, we want to go ahead and make sure that this bolt is completely tight back onto the axle before tightening these two bolts. All right, once you go ahead and tighten this bolt, go ahead and tighten these two on the bottom. Since I'm already working on the right side of the bike, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten down the bolts on the fender. All right, and go ahead and tighten the other side as well. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and put the left side caliper back on. And I'm just gonna use this flathead screwdriver to open it just a little bit more to slide into the rotors. Just like that. All right, once you got it in place, go ahead and put your two bolts back on. And you can go ahead and tighten those as well. Now before I put the other caliper on, go ahead and put this tab back here that clips onto the rear of the wheel cover. Like so. Now finally we're gonna put back the other caliper. Now once you've tightened everything down at this point, I always wanna make sure that the wheel spins freely, and if you've done everything correctly, it should look just like this. And if it spins like that, we're good. And of course, you want to make sure that your brakes are working correctly. You want to squeeze them a couple times, especially if you opened up the caliper like I did. Once you've done that, it doesn't hurt to double check again, spin it. This time, tap on your brakes. And we're good. But that's gonna put a wrap to this video, guys. And just remember, if you enjoy watching videos like this, please hit the subscribe button, and I appreciate the support if you hit that like button for me as well. But like always, God bless you guys, and we'll see y'all on the next video.